The topic of today's discussion is going to be interesting one. It's about brain drain in Africa, and I want to start today's discussion by quoting something interesting that I have read on a blog by the London School of Economics. Apparently, there are more Ghanaian nurses in the UK than there are in Ghana. So I think this is a very interesting segue to start our discussion, and I would like to give this opportunity for a particular Ghanaian amongst us to share his thoughts about this fact and brain drain within the context of Africa. Abdul Bari.
Yes, I think this is particularly worrying, and more also the reason behind this is that people are just in their whole life working towards moving to the UK to work as a nurse. What you come to realize is that our government is spending so much to train these nurses, and at the end of the day, these nurses don't tend to work for the government. You realize that if you go to a Ghanaian nursing college, they give them what we call allowance for just going to the nursing college. So it means that the government have the intention of training more nurses, but at the end of the day, what happens is that most of these nurses they end up leaving the country. So if you're a Ghanaian, the these statistics wouldn't be worrying for you, because it's like for professions like nursing, we can't say we have enough, but we are not so much worried that nurses are leaving. We are so much worried that if it were medical doctors, or if we're surgeons, or it were physicians, or any other profession. But for the nurses, we have a lot of nursing colleges. We have a lot of nurses just in the system who aren't employed. The government cannot employ all of them. So they found this new window of getting themselves employed. Yeah.
Interesting points that you've raised, Abdul Bari, how there is a lack of employment opportunities within Ghana to cater to the increasing number of graduates within the nursing sector. I want
Yes.
to go to Arisa, but before going to Arisa, I want to talk about a very interesting research done by New York University, namely by William Easterly. And his research had some very interesting conclusions. And to my surprise, and to the surprise of many, he came to the conclusion that brain drain isn't actually bad for Africa. And he raised three interesting points. One, he made the claim that the brain drain from Africa isn't as large compared to India or China. So any skill gap cannot be attributed to this particular brain drain. And in addition, he cited that the benefits of brain drain outweigh its negative effects. Namely, he cited the large sums of remittance that are being sent back from abroad, and he continued to argue that these remittances wouldn't exist without brain drain. So, uh, within this context, Erisa, I want you to weigh in how you see brain drain. Do you see it as a net positive or as a net negative?
Yeah, thank you, Brooke, for introducing us to this very interesting topic. So, first of all, I don't know if I'm loud and clear to you guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, you are loud and clear.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, thank you, Brooke, for the interesting topic. Yeah, whether brain drain is a good thing or a bad thing. But in my case, I don't know. Like, I'm seeing Brooke frozen, so I don't know if he's still
Yes,
with us or he's out of.
yes, I
He's
can.
with us.
I think you can go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think it is all about how scholars and one decides to look at it from these different angles. So I think Brooke is finally out of the of the room. Can you notice that, Abdul?
Yeah, he's out. He's out.
Yeah, I think his network is not
Yeah,
still
but I
has a
think
problem. So
the recording. I don't know whether the recording will still be working or not.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's saying anything in the group. Let me see. And you see anywhere whether oh yeah, the recording is still going on by the way. So yeah.
Now this is.
Yeah, I think it's here. Brooke. Brooke, can you hear us? Abdul, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, but I think Brooke is still out. Is out again. I think we should have just continued. What do you think?
You think we should have what?
I'm saying we should have continued. Am I breaking? Because now time is running and Brooke is
Yeah,
just coming in and out.
I think we should have continued.
Yeah, because now, I mean, the whole thing is going to be a mess because I don't know if it will be possible to edit it and someone cuts it through this part because it's like now, I don't know how many minutes in
Okay.
between here of
Yeah,
traffic.
we can just have a discussion among ourselves so that you give some information, I give my view, and then in 30 minutes time we can. I think it will be long enough.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, so he was asking whether brain drain is a positive thing or a negative thing, and he quoted a study that has been conducted by I don't know certain professor proving that actually there have been some benefits from brain drain, especially on the side of if you look at the remittances which are sent in by the people who go outside of these African countries. But I mean, I think sometimes there is exaggeration within these studies because I actually did a study in one of my particular courses that I was having in the previous semester at Sciences. And we are looking at the economic benefits of remittances, especially within the sub-Saharan African countries. But when you really narrow down into these studies and compare different studies and look at how much is being sent back and what does it do when it is sent back, you can't come to the conclusion that there are any positive benefits from these remittances. Because first of all, the remittances are taxed by the government nowadays. And those which actually are sent through the formal way, for instance, through the banks. But nowadays there are a lot of informal ways on how people send back remittances to make it more difficult for the government to tax them. So in the end of the day, even the governments which would have fostered development, they don't get taxes from these remittances. And when you look at the families that receive the remittances, so still it doesn't foster positive growth within the society because there are a few families, not every African family or within the continent can manage to send someone abroad, like to go and have a better life and then they send money back. No. There are a few families, so still it encourages even inequality. So if someone goes outside there and sends back something to their family, not every family does that. So on a scale of a whole village, you may find that it's only 10% out of the entire village that have people outside who can send back the remittances. So what about those families without people who are outside? They will still stay behind. You get the point. So
Yeah.
that is the dynamic that I'm trying to look at. But again, for me, I wanted to us to look at this fact that Africa has been situated in a way that it is a source where others, especially the developed countries, come in and pick what they want. There is that aspect which we have been talking about of extraction. Africa's being looked at as a source of, for instance, minerals, but also not only minerals, but even the human resource. Because when you look at the amount of people in terms of human capital that was lost during slavery, is very huge through the slave trade routes that were all over the African continent. This side of West Africa, where the transatlantic slave trade leading people to the Caribbeans and the Americans. Then the other side in the east, we had the Indian slave trade across the Indian Ocean. So people being moved outside of Africa. Africa is not receiving immigrants to contribute. And my question, actually, my big question here is, at what point are we going to develop the African societies to make sure that they are sustainable themselves? Because if we are saying Africa is underdeveloped, Africa is very poor, but at the same time, picking out the best out of it, people who would have contributed, for instance, in the health sector, people who would have contributed in the infrastructure, people who would have contributed, for instance, in the academia, but the professors, when you look at the professors who are African professors, but currently maybe based on, these other Western and European universities, they are not contributing back to the society. So Africa is losing. And I mean, I can use a reference of us. We have all of us here, we have been outside of our countries and we have seen, like, people might argue that still they can make an impact from outside, but to what extent can they make that impact? At the end of the day, it goes back to the individual persons. People, we who manage to move out of Africa, in one way or the other, we may manage to change our lives. But those ones who remain, we are complaining about the bad institutions, about maybe our structures not having enough capacity to facilitate. For instance, if we are producing nurses, they can't find jobs, they can't find everything that they need from within the country. But the question is, who will ensure that these services are there when we who have been developed to that capacity, instead of remaining and changing things, we opt to go outside because we know maybe UK is going to pay well, Germany is going to pay well, or America is going to pay well. You see, at a certain point, we have failed to sacrifice for our own countries to change things. We prefer to go for the shortcut to earn a living for ourselves, but when we are killing the institutions ourselves. So there is no any benefit in brain drain for Africa. It is actually, it's like having a wound and you don't address it, you just cover it up without treating it from the inside. you get some relief in the meantime, and those are the remittances. But in the long run, you will still stay having the problem that Africa is poor. Africa doesn't have experts. He has to always depend from outside. Yeah, that's my.
Okay, thank you, comrade. Uh, in terms of analyzing the problem, do you think African countries are at fault? Do you think African countries are to blame? I'm raising this question because I read a very interesting research conducted by the French Council of Economists, and I think I may have also shared it to Abdul Bari before, and how the developed countries, not only France, but also Canada, the US, work strategically to attract, to make sure that talented individuals from Africa actually come to their countries. And it is within this context that I want to raise this question to Abdul Bari. Do you think the blame is squarely on African countries, or do you think equally Western developed countries are also implementing projects, are also making it more attractive than it is naturally for talented students to migrate and to permanently settle in those countries?
I think this is a simple question for me. For me, I would, in all sense, place the blame on African governments. You see, countries operate like families. Your father, for instance, will not want the next neighbor to have food and his family will not have food. It's just the same thing for countries. A country like France or US will want to have the best of human resource. They want to have the best of coders. They will want to have the best of computer scientists. They want to have the best of medical doctors. So whatever they would do to have them, they will do it. You then, as a government, or as an African country, you know your country is not attractive. You must also systematically change that to make your country attractive, not only to your own citizens so that you can retain them, but also for outsiders to also come to your country. Why am I saying so? In Ghana, and I know it's so for in Nigeria and most African countries, we have scholarships, and these scholarships are purposefully to send students outside to study. One may argue that this scholarship, okay, maybe it's just secular migration. Maybe they go there, they gain skills, they come back. Okay, that's a good call. But you realize that some of the courses they are sending them to study, we have same departments, same human resource, that the same professors teaching same courses, but still, government still finance these people to go study those courses. So in essence, our governments are even encouraging their own citizens to leave. If we are sponsoring someone to go and study economics in the UK or in the US, I don't see the sense in it because we already have good economics departments in Ghana. But let's say maybe you want to train a neurosurgeon. We say, okay, we don't have the equipment, we don't have the teaching hospitals for that. Okay, now it will make sense to sponsor someone to go to the US or to go to any developed country to do that. In that sense, it makes sense. So I think that our own government purposefully are not making our citizens stay. That said, there's another dimension. You can think about it from this way. You see that most government scholarships, especially in Africa, are not there to cater for who really need them. You go to a department and then let's say all the top 5 students who graduated last year, they have to all leave because even if they stay and trying to pursue the government scholarship, they're not going to get it. That scholarship is being given to politicians. And if we're a government and you are giving scholarship to politicians and not the top students to enhance your human resources, then automatically you are chasing them away. A government like France will have the effort scholarship, which will attract students. A government like US will have the Bright scholarship, who will attract those kind of people. So in essence, I don't blame them because it's just like survival of the fittest. So we as Africans must come to realize that this is how the world is, and our governments must stand up to put policies in place to prevent this. Currently in Ghana, there is a bill going on. The current government says that they want to transform how government scholarships are being awarded. And so they've proposed a new bill. To the surprise of everybody, we all thought that maybe they're going to say that, okay, because maybe the previous government or previously scholarships were being given to politicians instead of those who really need it, they are going to change the whole award system. They didn't do that. If you really want a scholarship that cater for those who need it, what, in my opinion, you should do is that you must give the scholarship to the faculties. For example, if you want students who want to study a certain medical specification, then you have to go to the medical departments in those schools. Let those professors select who wins the scholarship and who doesn't. Politicians in all African countries still maintain that position. Politicians will select who gets a scholarship and who doesn't. And trust me, where does, and in any serious country, does a politician do that? So basically, the bottom line, what I'm saying is that it's our own government chasing our own human resources away, and those Western countries, they've been more reasonable, are now collecting whatever we are pushing away. So I will put the blame solely on African countries. Yeah.
And comrade, sorry, Erisa, how do you see the increasing number of migration to the US or to Canada or to France? How do you see it when you compare it with the large influx of students that have went from Japan to the West and have ultimately returned to develop their country? When you look at China and how an increasing number of students, even though they do also settle, they tend to take back the knowledge, the skills that they've learned in those developing countries, and they tend to start enterprises. But that doesn't seem to be the case in Africa. So how do you see brain drain within the context of remigration back to Africa?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very sad story, and this is something very, emotional even to talk about, especially if the person like me who is a Pan-Africanist. This is something that is worrying us as a continent because I think out of the 10 students who leave each African country, if we are to calculate and see how many people like return back to these home countries, it is even less than 1%, you know like I think it connects back to what Abdul was talking about. Like, yes, we can say the conditions within our countries, of course, do not facilitate, are not offering enough for someone who has managed to live outside their home countries, like to say now let me go back because of everything that we have talked about. But of course, like for me, as I always like to say it, there is a problem that is going on. I don't know if you have noticed it within Canada, USA, and Europe. There is a big problem within these countries. And first of all, the problem is that they are facing a challenge of demography. Their population is now, majority of them, they are old. So they are lacking a lot of professionals, especially within the health sector, in the education, and other sectors. So these are nations which at this point they have adopted all of these policies of depopulation. Their population are not producing, but still they have this deficit of not having enough people to keep their economy and societies operating. That's why we are seeing that they are coming out with all of these policies to attract especially specialists from other countries to come in and fill these gaps, and that's where Africa is falling prey. We have we lack these facilities at home. We can't offer the best employment. Maybe we can't even offer the best wages. But there are these countries which have a deficit of experts, and they are ready to pay for you know all of these bills and offer all of the services that maybe we would all wish to have if we are educated and have the knowledge. So this is the challenge that these countries, for them, they are offering all of these services to pull out of Africa. And it is really very saddening, especially for us Africans, because as I said before, who is going to ensure that we have these developed societies? Who is going to ensure that at one point we shall not need to send our people to go outside of the country because they are not contributing anything to our society? They just live and leave that gap. And that's why we have this gap, and everyone who wishes here, like to have a better life, they can't stay here because we can't pay for them, we can't offer them the services. They have to go outside. And at the end of the day, but for me, I don't blame the African countries because they are not acting in space. As I always say, that there is a system. And as I said in the beginning, that this is a trajectory that it clearly traces back to slavery. We had all of these slaves being driven away. I mean, one of my friends, they tend to say that, during those periods, Africans were forced to move out of Africa forcefully through slave trade. But now, today, we have slave imposed and self-driven immigration where we travel willingly, especially those who have qualifications and if you attempt to get the visas. But of course we even have brothers and sisters who are risking themselves to travel across the Mediterranean Sea to make sure that they enter through Europe, I think through Italy and Spain, which are connected to the Mediterranean Sea. So you see, people are still risking to move away from Africa. So I think for me it is also another problem with the mindset, because actually we who have lived out, in these developed countries, we have seen even some of our brothers and sisters, they reach there and they don't make it. They still suffer. I mean, we have seen blacks there. We have seen the kind of jobs they are doing in these developed countries. They are still more like hard labor. It's very rare to find an African immigrant in Europe, Canada, or USA when they are occupying a very, I don't know, very a senior position within these countries. We know the kind of job that they are doing. But I think all of that comes with the desperation within our countries, as we have been saying that the conditions are not good. But again, I think we are not too patriotic to the extent to realize that, look, who is going to develop our societies? We are the ones who are supposed to develop the societies, but the more we continue to move away from Africa, yes, we shall change our lives in the shortest period, but the problem will still stay there. And there is one point I want to conclude with. Still talking about the way how the USA, Canada, and Europe have become more smart to make sure that they drain all of the best out of Africa. They have offered these scholarships. Of course, they are taking the best out of the continent. And now they have these other multinational institutions. We have different development corporations. Actually, I think some of my friends, they have told me they have been here in Africa, of course, representing these institutions which are from outside. I may not mention them because maybe that will be more too sensitive. But I mean, they are here to streamline the process of how to get these professionals who have the qualifications out of Africa to go and work in these countries, talking about all of the benefits, all of the packages that are coming with that. We have seen most of these countries coming out with what they are calling opportunity cards, making it very easy for you, especially if you're a professional, to acquire a visa and go and you work in these countries. I think Abdul, you are an economist. They always say there is nothing like a free lunch. Everything comes at a cost. So they offer these things not because they much want people to have a better life or to work well. No, they are concerned about their society because they are aged, their populations are not producing, which is an opposite with Africa. Africa now, I think, poses as one of the continents with the largest number of the youngest population, and that one also comes with another aspect. Maybe we shall talk about it the next time, the demographic dividend. So what we should do is to ensure that we realize this pattern as African, and of course those in power who can influence the policy, come up with the policies, ensure that at least we develop the education system, we develop the health sector to ensure that we retain this capital. Otherwise, we are still doomed. Yeah, that's what I can say.
Thank you, Arisa. And I
You want
think
me?
you raised an interesting point about demography in Western countries, how, whether it is in Canada, in the UK, in France, in Germany, how there is a trend where there's a decreasing number of people of working age, and now they have a growing number of old age people, and how their health system needs more workers, which their economy and sadly which their demography won't allow as it is, and how there is a need to attract more and more people from Africa. Before turning to you, Abdul Baghi, how do you see the existing brain drain affect African demography? I know this might not be a direct question, but researchers show that if you have a more educated society on average, they're less like they're less likely to have more children. And do you think the brain drain will have an indirect effect of promoting a higher birth rate within Africa?
I think that for now, Africa, our problem is that we already have the population. Our problem is not about whether we having low fertility rates or whatever. Our problem is that the people we are losing. So our concern is like you realizing that there are less than 10% of doctors in Gambia, and they are, how will I put it? Like I read a statistic somewhere that says that there are more Liberian doctors in Chicago than there are in Liberia. And there are more Benin health workers in France than there are in Benin. So I think that for Africa, in terms of demographic, I would say we are blessed. So if you look at our population pyramid, you realize that the base is still thick. It means that we have younger population who is coming up. Now, what we need to do is that we need to put policies in place to make sure that this base of the pyramid, this young population, they don't go to fix the European deficit or the Western deficit. Because you look at the Western pyramid and you realize that it's more like a cone where you have the bottom the younger population is small, and then all of them are aging. So they need younger people to fill this gap. And usually we'll fall prey to all this because we don't have policies in place to keep our youth in our countries. So what I would say is that it all boils back to what I was saying. Governments must make sure that this blessing of demographic we have, we maintain it, and then we use it as a blessing, and we don't invest so much in this population, and at the end of the day they end up in different countries. I read somewhere, you realize that they said African countries, in African institutions like our universities or whatever, annually we lose about 4 billion. Just imagine when you are going to school in Uganda or you're going to school in Ghana, you don't actually pay the full cost of your education because government is already funding part of it. Government pay your professors. Government make sure that you have facilities to sit in. Government make sure that you have health insurance. All those things is expenditure just that you get education. So right after graduation, you left the country. So all the investment government has done in you is actually a loss to the government. So I think for now, our worry is not even about whether as more people are getting educated, we are going to have low fertility rates or whatever. Our concern should be that this young generation that we have, in 10 years' time or in 20 years' time, how do we retain them? How do we make sure that they don't go to fund the deficit in the Western countries? So that would be my take on it.
Okay. Thank you so much, Abdul Bari. To Erisa, I want to focus on the solutions to this problem. And as someone, as a Pan Africanist, what do you think are the policy interventions that you see that can cut this rapid increase of brain drain? Do you see any possible solutions in the horizon, or do you think that this problem will persist for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, so thank you. I think one of the immediate solutions that I see, I don't know to what extent we still teach political education in our institutions. I think the immediate solution would be embarking on that, Pan-African strategy to make sure that we teach our people the importance of, focusing on our societies first. Nowadays we have, I think I like this from Trump. I don't necessarily as such a fan of Trump, but is was one person who is driving this narrative of America first, and I think this is the trend that we are seeing everywhere. All of these developed countries are focusing on their national economies, society, and stuff like that. They are closing up and doing all of those, policies to ensure that they are focusing on their society. So, I mean, as a Pan-Africanist, because the problem is not brain drain, but the question we need to address is why are these people in the first way in the first position moving out from Africa? So we need to teach our people history. We need to teach our people where our societies are coming from, and we need to teach people why do we even see this trend happening? Because it is not happening out of blue, and it is not just starting to happen now. But I mean, as I said, first of all, we need to first liberate ourselves mentally and in the mind to understand that there is no any other foreign person who is going to come in to change our society. They are coming in, first of all, to clear their ways. And they are coming in to ensure that the trend continues. We continue to facilitate their growth and development, as we are seeing. We continue to provide resources, and now, even beyond natural resources, we continue to provide human capital at the expense and at the cost of our own societies. So we need to restructure our educational system. Our education system is constructed in a way that we produce out workers who are just there, waiting to be employed by others. And unfortunately, at the moment, our African governments and societies can't offer this. That's why people are looking outside of the continent. So if we restructure the education system and we say, look, we start teaching our people that we ourselves were the ones who are responsible for our society, we need to change our society. So it will not matter where the person will graduate, and instead of thinking about doing impact back in society, they think about the salary. How much am I going to earn? How much am I going to earn as an individual? So I think we need to first go beyond that and understand that it will not matter how much we are earning, but what will matter is the impact. Let me first suffer earning less or lower, but I change things in my community other than running away and go to Canada or USA where I'm going to earn a lot, but still leave my community when the problem is not solved. It means even my son or daughter that will come after me will run away because he will find the situation same like how I left it. So we need to restructure our education system, focus on the people, make sure that we teach our people history, and we teach them to be patriotic and focus on the society. In the long run, it will pay off, though it may not. It may be very, very difficult in the beginning because no one will accept that. As you see, Abdul is shaking the head. He's like, no, 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 no. Maybe you can pick it up from there. You disagree.
They always say that I've forgotten the proverb, but it's like if you are hungry, you just let your stomach go first before your brain. And that is exactly what is happening. As a graduate, when you are coming out of the university, you realize that now your parents are not going to cater for your daily bread. So you have to fight for it. Then you quickly project, if I'm supposed to stay in Ghana or I'm supposed to stay in whichever African country, how long before I land on a job? It's going to be like 5 years. Okay, I say let's forget about job. Let's say the educational institution trained me to create my own job. Then I try being an entrepreneur. How many venture capitalists do we have in Ghana that can fund businesses? You realize that most of these venture capitals are rather in the Western countries that come to invest in entrepreneurs. All the small uh, government policies that tend to finance entrepreneurs, at the end of the day, they don't really go where they're supposed to go. You see them being given to politicians. So I will always blame them this on misguided national policies. We don't prioritize what we want. We don't look at the long run. What we have in Africa is politics, it's not policies.
Abdul Bari, to jump on that, I think you raised an interesting point about policies, and more often, whether it's venture capital or the necessary capital in general needed to create employment, there is it's in short supply, and it's no secret to anyone that Africa has a real capital accumulation problem. And uh, within this context, it's really hard to create jobs, especially jobs that pay decent wages, that is comparable with the likes of the US or the UK or Australia or Germany or France. And as it stands, in terms of identifying the right policy, do you think the problem is with job creation and a lack of opportunities? Or do you think that the education system in African countries is perhaps overproducing a lot of students in particular sectors without anticipating the demands and the possibilities that the economy can generate? I want you to weigh in on that. Erisa or Abdul Bari, if you're interested. Do you think we need to redirect our education system like how Taiwan did in the 1960s in terms of focusing on vocational training instead of investing on humanities or white collar jobs for the economy? Or do you think the government should leave the education system to the side and just focus on job creation and more opportunities in terms of attracting capital?
One thing I think is there are two things you have to move together as you are trying to prioritize the kind of educational system you want to build. You must as well provide jobs. You may argue that okay, if you have an educational system that encourage people to create their own jobs, you don't need to create jobs. But in the first instance, it means that you have to have a system that will help people to create these jobs. But that is what we always lacking. I will say that we need, in as much as we want to fine tune our education to maybe what we really need, we will also need to create the jobs as well. Because you look at it from you we still have everybody will say that we need computer scientists in this modern world. We need a lot of engineers. But you call a colleague who has graduated in computer science or who has graduated in civil engineering, you expect that this person at least should be employed. Maybe if me, who graduated in economics, is not employed, okay, it makes sense because the country doesn't really need a lot of economists. But you can't say same for computer scientists, you can say same for civil engineers. But at the end of the day, all of us are still sitting home. So I kind of believe that although we need to prioritize our educational need, like funding a lot of these math, science, and technology courses, we still need to prepare the ecosystem where people and government can create jobs. And when I say government create jobs, it's not government necessarily doing the job production or employing people, because you come to realize that where government can only employ people is into the civil service, and a government cannot do a lot of that. It means what I'm talking about is government creating an ecosystem where all these people, let's say, if you are a computer science graduate, you can maybe try, if you are trying to do something, and then there's at the ideation stage, there are venture capitals, there are government initiatives that when they see fruition in that idea, they can help you grow it. If that's how all those big tech companies came about, we realized OpenAI was just some people coming together trying to train some models, and they got funding for it, and all of a sudden you can now imagine the number of people that company will be employing. And the same thing, we need to create the environment for entrepreneurs to survive, to create the jobs. Somebody may argue that, okay, if we do that, we're turning the system into two capitalism. Yeah, that's another problem, because if we're, in as much as we're trying to create an ecosystem for entrepreneurs to survive, we may be building a capitalist system which may disproportionately affect others. But if you want, so it's just something hard we have to juggle it, because in as much as you're trying to create jobs, create wealth for the whole of the society, you inadvertently create inequality. But I think that it's better to create inequality than to have a society where everyone is impoverished. Maybe after that has happened and all of us has progressed, we can try correcting that than trying to correct it at the beginning. So it's a difficult thing to do, but we'll see where we'll be. That would be my take on it.
Interesting points, Abdul
I
Bari,
would,
and I
yeah,
I see Comrade smiling, and I will let him weigh in on. I think he has some thoughts to share with us.
yeah. So I just wanted to pick it up from there. I mean, Abdul is coming from the economics background, and he said a really very interesting, but at the same time worrying point that it's better to have inequality than having poverty. I mean, it all goes back to the way how this capitalistic world has structured our economies. Because capitalism is something very strange and foreign to our societies, in my own perspective. We are pushed into this economic system, which we are not originally owners of the system, and we are just being forced into this system, trying to adopt all of the market and the liberal economic policies which have destroyed our society and structured us in a way that there are those a few people. I think it is just only 1% of the population that controls the capital, and the rest we just have to be workers for these people. That's why I think even it is very difficult in terms of talking about ventures to boost especially African economies, because we don't have capital. And this is the particular point where these forefathers of the economic system that we are in or pursuing will come in and still tell you that the government has to roll back. It doesn't have to interfere within the operation of the markets. That's why for me I blame our governments to a less extent, because I mean they have all of these umbrellas where they are not acting on by themselves. They have to act according to the rules and guidelines set by, for instance, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund. The other time I was telling you, in each and every African country, central bank, there is a specialist who is not a nation of that country but sits in the national bank as an advisor, either to the governor of the bank or the deputy or something like that. Every African country, you go and do your own research, including Ghana, Uganda, Ethiopia. There is a specialist sent by the World Bank and IMF to see, to monitor, to control how does the economics operate within this country, especially in terms of monetary policies and monetary funds. So this is the fundamental problem that we are having, that there is someone above even our government structure that is influencing how the how policies are being made, especially in terms of fiscal policies and decisions within the country. So I mean this is what I mean when I talk about the superstructure that is influencing our society. So we can say, and I think we are the other time we are also talking about ventures. There are startups in Africa, there are ventures in Africa, but they don't have capital. But of course, when you go to the way how things are operating, they will tell you no, the government has capital, but it's not supposed to come and intervene in this process. It has to leave the markets to operate. It has to leave these guys to act on their own. I think the liberals, they call it the role of the big government. The government has to be out. So this is the first problem that we are having, which actually is a very direct opposite in developed countries, because we all now see, we have just come to see how the United States government is intervening in the operation of the market, throwing all of these tariffs, directives, and everything to make sure that the economy boosts. But if this is done in Africa, then it is blamed, because that's not how the market is supposed to operate. The government does not have to intervene, does not have to come in with this and that. So I mean, there are all of these restrictions which are, preventing our governments, in fact, to work for the people. And that's why they just leave everything to operate as they are. And then in the end of the day, I think we see these discrepancies and disparities within the communities. But I believe that societies are different, societies are unique, and if we would obtain and adopt policies which are really speaking directly to the needs of our societies and communities, things would have been different. But in the end of that day, we are not acting on our own self. So that's how we end up adopting policies, not necessarily to help our communities and societies. Because I mean, I wouldn't even say that, yeah, it is better to have development or to be rich within equality. Because what is richness in the first place within an African context or within our different unique societies? You may find that at the end, development may not even necessarily be about how much someone has on their account in terms of money, which is a certain value in another society, but not necessarily maybe in a Ghanaian society or a Ugandan society. So some people prefer to have progress, to have happiness within the society, other than having individual accumulation, like how we see it in other countries. You find someone is rich enough to afford even buying off the entire treasure of the country, but when majority of the people within the country are suffering. But again, this is what they have taught us to pursue, and this is where we are getting it wrong, that we are pursuing something that is alien to us, very far away, distracted from what our people need. Yeah. Back to you,
Thank you,
Brooke.
Risa. Thank you,
Yeah.
Risa. You raised some interesting points about how the policies are misaligned with what the continent really needs right now. And I wanted to also touch upon the fact that many African countries, especially in the past 15 years, have more and more graduates each year. But unfortunately, uh, their economies cannot yet really capture or perhaps create opportunities for all of those graduate students. And it increasingly looks that as more and more graduates are coming into the job market, there aren't jobs to begin with, and even the existing jobs are not comparable in terms of compensation with what those graduates can obtain in the Western world. So, as a policymaker, do you think that it's inevitable for a particular generation to sacrifice themselves for the particular country so that the next generation won't have to face the same kind of lack of opportunities or low wages which the current generation is facing? Or do you think that policymakers can find a delicate balance where existing graduates can get better high paying jobs and transform the economy? I want to give this opportunity to Abdul Baqi. I think you understand my question, right?
Yes, I do, but that's
As an
difficult.
economist, I think that's an appropriate question because
Yeah.
I think it does inform policy at the end of the day. Because if you really don't have an option, you then have to focus on convincing minds, as Erisa mentioned earlier.
Erisa, yeah, it's true. But you talk about one generation sacrificing ourselves, and the problem is that we may not be willing to do that until there is a government policy that will make us to do. So in every instance, I don't know, I may be repetitive, but I always refer back to national policies because that is our last resort. Like initially, Arisa talked about the fact that we should teach patriotism, we should teach Pan Africanism, we should teach things like nationalism so that you have the country at your heart. I think those things are important. I don't ignore that. Most of the times I tell my friends that I think that we don't teach enough of history. We don't teach enough of what people should know, what we should know about ourselves, so that we will sacrifice more for the country. That notwithstanding, you can have all the patriotism in you, you can have all the willingness to sacrifice for the nation. But if you are doubtful where your next meal is going to come from, obviously you are going to you may throw all the nationalism aside in pursuit of your meal. And that is just human nature. That is just human nature. So I don't think, if there is no change in policy, no generation will be willing or can even sacrifice themselves to close the gap. And I think that we need a national policy, a policy that I've described before although it may have, there's not a policy that may be 100%. Just like I talked about a system where there is easy fund for people to create their own jobs. There is a system that is built for people to conduct research and other things to make sure that these ideas came into fruition. There's still a possibility that we may be creating a society where inequality will be high. But it's just, that's why I say it's an, when you try doing something, there's always a byproduct. Even when we say that, but we always say that you can transform it to be something good. So although Erisa complained that my capitalism way may create inequality, I do accept that. But where I tend to say that I as an economist, or my small understanding of economics, I sincerely believe that whoever says that there shouldn't be government intervention in any economic sense and leave the market to operate freely, maybe it's not, we can't just do that. So although I preach that in some like all my discussions I've outlined, you see that what I keep saying is that government must do this, government must do this. So we need government to set the ball rolling, and all of us will follow along. You can't just have a society where the system can, the citizenry can team up to make things happen. It may be so, but in our instance, we don't have the resources. We don't have maybe a 1 billionaire who can just open his own venture and finance like 10 and willing to invest in like 10 entrepreneurs or whatever. We don't have that kind of society. So we need the government to set the ball rolling. So my whole policy
one question which I would like to pose to you there, just to ask a little bit there. Sorry to come in. What will the government do in this capitalist, or in the you know how capitalism operates, you know how neoliberal policies are operating? What will the government do apart from proposing these policies? Because there is nothing left for the government to do.
Look at we always praise the US for being the most capitalist country, and then they praise they praise themselves for being capitalist. But what we are seeing now is basically what I'm talking about. You see that government is trying to invest in the companies they see as being critical. That is showing support or setting the stage for the businesses to operate, because government knows that there may be an external competition that may kill their businesses. They put tariffs because they know that there may be competition from other AI companies from China. They block exports of chips to China. So maybe in the African context, it may not be tariff. It may not be putting a ban on exports of chips to other countries, but it may come in a different form. And in a different form, what I mean is that the government policy should really finance ideas. We should not keep giving money to other politicians because they are just from our party. We should finance businesses. And one thing I would like to add is that a politician should not be in charge of the person who selects the ideas, which idea is to be funded, which idea is not supposed to be funded. That should be left to professionals. And that is the kind of policies we need.
Yeah, just to jump on that and supplement on what you were saying. The idea, I think we may argue and define how we are addressing it, but I think what the government should do, it should come in and offer what I think is called protectionism. Though traditional economists will disagree with me on that. But what we are seeing now from these developed countries is protectionism to their home economies, to their home companies, to their homegrown products. And this is something that is still lacking within African countries. And this is something that is being, said that no, you are not supposed to do that, because the markets, which I always refer to, they are not allowed to operate like that. The government is not allowed to come in and intervene. But when you go back into history and read how developed countries developed, they were protected. Domestic industries have to be protected. Domestic products have to be protected. Everything that is internally has to be protected at a certain point to give it space, to allow it time to grow. Then if something grows and you have accumulated a lot, then that's the point where you are supposed to open up to the, to the external markets and the external actors to come in. And that's something that we saw in the history of development, of how developed countries developed. But this is something that is being denied to the African countries. Governments are told, you must stop here. You are not good in management, you are not efficient, you have to roll back, you have to leave the market to operate competitively. There is always speak about competition, but when actually there is no competition, we are all seeing what these developed countries are doing: protectionism, throwing tariffs, intervening, financing, doing all of kind of stuff at the same time. So this is something that still lacks within the African context. And maybe one more last point that I would like to say before you come in, Abdul. I believe that we have enough policies. I don't know how much research we have done, but I mean, all of us, we know how our parliaments in African countries, every day they are passing a policy. The other day they are passing a policy. Where I come from, actually, we have even reached an extent that Uganda, we have a lot of policies, most of which are very good in paper, but we propose these policies, pass them in the parliament, but they are implemented in Rwanda. So very unfortunate and funny, because like when you look at how Uganda has developed, at least maybe from 1986, there have been some sort of stability compared to Rwanda, which has experienced a genocide recently until 1994, 1995. They were still fighting. But at this point, they have tried to do something in terms of development. They haven't produced a lot of policies. I think we have enough already on paper. What lacks is the implementation. And we should sit down and rethink our implementation. What is lacking within the implementation? We have these policies which are very good and nice. We have the resources, but what lacks is, now a little bit of implementing these policies and what we have already proposed. Yes, Abdul.
Uh, yes, I think you've kind of you've addressed everything.
Okay, interesting points. Uh, well, in terms of policy, especially recently, we've seen the rhetoric in the US and even in the UK how they want to cut down migration in general. But if we're talking about specifics, the US is very much interested in keeping the trained manpower within country, and President Donald Trump even has promised that he will be looking to give students who've graduated a green card to not only stay in the US but also work in the US. So, how do you counter such policy measures? Do you see countries taking radical measures like banning their high school and university graduates from going to the US and other Western countries uh, to seek higher education? Do you think that can be the appropriate response given the lack of capital to create job opportunities? Or do you think there is a softer approach in response to such proactive measures by the US and other countries like Canada that have active programs to attract people in African countries? Abdul Bari, do you think radical policy solutions should be considered? Because I think you mentioned the need for radical policy.
Yeah. Radical. I don't think the what I think we need is that Africa, we most at times act on what is called reactive crisis management policies instead of putting what I call proactive systematic development. So the thing is that we cannot prevent our citizens. You cannot just put a ban and say that, oh my graduate, nobody should go to the US to study. You cannot do that. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't sound well, because there are a lot of things what we call secular migration. When some of your citizens move and learn from different countries, we mix knowledge, and that kind of secular migration enrich your intellectuals. Look at, for instance, look at your French professors. You realize that most of your professors have studied in different countries, some in the UK, some in the US. But what is important is that they are back in their country teaching their schools. So what we need is that we need to put policies in place. In as much as we're trying to prevent people from not going, but we can't radically say that nobody's going. There's an outright ban. what we need is that a kind of attractive system, a system that will bring back the few that have left, to bring them back, and most importantly, to prevent a lot from leaving as well. That would be my
I want to jump in because I want to raise my earlier question again, and I want to double down on the fact that you've said we need to create a conducive environment for people to come back. But as
yeah.
I mentioned earlier, there is a lack of capital and job opportunities. And to frankly speak, the economic structure doesn't allow for high paying technical jobs as it exists. Do you see any car manufacturing plants? Do you see any advanced technology companies? As it exists, the economic structure doesn't allow high paying jobs. And there is a lack of capital accumulation to create such industries at all. So, how do you see those conducive environments being created? Or is it perhaps wishful thinking at this point?
The thing is that when you talk about high paying jobs, the problem is that if I'm in the US or I'm in the UK or France, maybe I'm being paid 3,000 euros because all my family stays in Ghana or a different country. When I'm sending that money or when I'm looking at things I can do in Ghana, I see it as a high pay. But in France or in the UK, I'm barely surviving. I'm part of the less earners in that country. So in those countries, that is not actually a high earning income, but we just stay in there because all what you're planning to do, maybe you try planning to send a lot of remittance home, you're trying to do whatever. So in that sense, that money you see yourself as a high earner. This is the point I'm trying to put across. Similarly, in Ghana, if the equivalent of someone who earns 3,000 in France, maybe will be someone who earns 4,000 Ghana cedis in Ghana. But right now, if you give a Ghanaian, would you rather earn 4,000 in Ghana or you rather earn 2,000 euros in France? The person will say, I would rather earn 2,000 euros in France because the person is not looking at the purchasing power. He's basically looking at the only the conversion. And that is where we get the high income paying things wrong because people, we tend to project what the money can do in our home country. You also talked about the fact that we don't have a lot of capital to invest in jobs that may pay higher or actually to create the jobs necessarily. I think everything we do is about national priorities. National, everything starts small. You don't have to necessarily start a big, let's say, a big car manufacturing company. First of all, what do we use in the farms? Most of our farmers use knapsack sprayers. Most of our farmers use simple equipment in the farm. As a country, we can start producing those things. And with time, that ecosystem will be created for we to transition to those big machinery. So that would be my take on it. High paying jobs in European countries settings, as we see it, in my case, in my suggestion, doesn't really even exist. They only exist if you are converting the money to what you earn in your home country.
Uh, I want to quickly jump in before I give Arisa a chance to weigh in. As I mentioned earlier, of course, in policy making, there is a need to sequence things. We can't start with a car manufacturing plant. But
Yeah.
as with the example of the farmers, if you choose to manufacture, for example, let's say certain farm equipments in Ghana, do you think Ghanaian manufacturing as it exists right now can be competitive with highly automated Chinese manufacturing? Or are you going to perhaps demand farmers to pay more so that Ghanaian workers can pocket uh, the increase in price? This is the delicate balance that I've been trying to mention earlier. That if you want to increase wages, this increment has to come from somewhere. So it has to either come from taxes, it has to either come from the citizens in terms of purchases. Erisa, how do you see this? Uh, do you see, in terms of policy making, do you think that the government has to be blunt and sacrifice the existing generation in terms of its wages to create a better opportunity for the future generation, or do you think there is an actual policy path right now for the government to take?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, maybe just to start from the point where we need to break down policy. What do we mean by policy when you talk about policy? For me, my understanding of policy that these are just small, simple actions which can be taken by the government, to solve a specific certain problem. Maybe if I'm to say in a simple way, like we have a problem, whether it is social, whether it is economical, whether it is sometimes political, and then the government sits down to come up with a various strategic process with a set of activities that we can do this and this to address this specific problem. So that is policy if we are talking about policy
Yes.
like that. But I mean, I will not differ so much. Yeah, yes, I will not differ so much from what I have said before. That first of all, we need to understand ourselves. We need to first of all to stop comparing ourselves to the developed countries. Unfortunately, this is what they have taught us, and this is what we have in our mind, that we have this pre-trained brains and pre-conceptualization of what development is in the first place. My friend Abdul was talking about even the aspect of salaries. When people are looking at what they are earning here, they are comparing it and even converting it either from maybe euro or to dollar, and then see how much they are getting here locally in our local currencies. And then someone will say, I'm earning less, then I'm earning more. We need to first stop that. In the 1960s, 1970s, when you look at the invasion of this conceptualization of what we are calling development, or even these policies which we are talking about, this is all purely capitalistic. The conceptualization of modernization, looking at development in terms of modernization, building those fancy and tall buildings, infrastructure, stuff like that. But we are forgetting other aspects, especially which aspects really mattered in our African context. Because I don't think that our forefathers and ancestors looked at these things of having a lot of money on the bank account, stuffs like that, or living a luxurious like lifestyle, stuffs like that. There were other aspects which mattered within society, social aspects apart from the economic. But now everything we are thinking about, we think about it in terms of the economy, the economics. What do I gain from this? What do I gain from that? But there are other aspects which are developmental but are being forgotten. I think one of my favorite scholars, Amartya Sen, tries to look at these aspects. He looks at development in terms of happiness. You may have a lot of money on the bank account, but how up are you with what you are having? So these are all forgotten aspects when we are looking at development and policy. So I'm trying to come at the point where you see our government and societies have been convinced what informs our policy is totally different from what our societies need, what our people need. We are here talking about farmers. 80% in most of African countries, they are farmers. 80% of the population, they are still depending on farm. So you can't wake up and start putting out policies which are targeting to streamline car manufacturing in a country like that. You are not focusing on agriculture, you are not focusing on climate change, you are not focusing on things which are mattering for the nation, but you are focusing on things which are going to ensure that maybe our economy has favorable conditions for Chinese cars to come in. How favorable conditions for France or Germany or UK or USA or Canada to import in their cars, and at the end of the day, who is benefiting from that? You are not solving the real problem that society is facing, because what is informing our policy is misguided, is pegged onto something that is not benefiting our society. So we need to redefine what informs our policy. And I think today most practitioners are talking about evidence-based policy making. I think we have all heard about that. We need to ensure that the policies that we are suggesting or bringing up, they are really targeting the real problems that we are facing. They are aimed at solving what problems are really existing within our societies, but not necessarily just bringing up policy which is going to just ensure the more operation of all of these foreign actors that we are having within the society. So yeah, yes, I mean we can change things, but we shall need to sacrifice. For me, I will not leave out that point. Of course, we cannot say that we are going to make people to now start working for free. they will not, but we need to strike a balance. I think, Brooke, you were talking about this. We need to have a policy sequence whereby we are striking a balance across all of these aspects, not to make sure that people are not working for free, but also to ensure that people are working, but when they have that nationalistic mentality that there is no one who is going to come in to build our country, and if we all opt for this the most way, like the shortest way to move out of the country, go work, be well, maybe send a little bit of remittances back to our home. Yes, we shall live, die, and live, but what is going to happen to our future generation? How are they going to survive? They are going to follow the same trajectory. People, as I think, as Abdul noted, we have all of these professors who have taught us in these different universities. They have traveled, yes, and actually, people have been traveling even in the pre-colonial society of Africa. We are not saying that people should not travel outside of Africa. People should travel, but when they travel, go outside there, acquire the knowledge, come back and change things. And I think this is what happened in the Southeast Asia, Hong Kong, Singapore, these countries which have experienced development in the shortest period. They have been able to travel, get education from outside, but come back and do change things, which is not happening in the case of Africa. And I think that is the most scaring part. That Africa has people who are ready to to change the world and influence things, but the moment they step outside of the continent, they never come back, and that's a very big gap. Yeah.
Thank you, Arisa. With the rapid rise of the knowledge economy, and to just give you an example, I think we have seen the chip war between the US and China, and how each Western country is increasingly looking for talented individuals to work in its semiconductor industry. Within this particular context, how do you see the UK's, America's, and other Western countries' actions to attract Africans? Do you think within the short term, Africa can cope with this increasing pressure?
Yeah.
Abdulbari.
Well, Abdubari, yeah, give it a try.
I didn't really get your question well. You're talking about.
My question is, do you think like Africa can withstand the pressure from Western countries that are looking to attract its talented students within the short term, especially with the aggravation of the technological competition that tends to be happening not only across the West and East, but also within Western countries as well?
As to whether we can withstand it or not, I think we may not be able to withstand it wholly, but I think that if we have correct policies in place, we may be able to withstand it partly. So I feel that there is this willingness by these countries to actually attract more people. So we as a country, we as a continent, if we don't put measures in place, we are going to keep losing them. We don't have the advantage in the first place. So it means that we have to fight harder to keep our people, to make sure that they don't go away. But the question as to whether we can withstand it, I think we can, but not wholly, but partly. And the partly is only and only if we have the right policies in place.
And Erisa, before jumping to you, do you think perhaps colonization has a role to play here? Because when you see countries like Japan, China, they had a very different language system, which didn't really, which wasn't conducive for their students to go in the US to pick up the language and to integrate as easily as, say, for example, a Nigerian nowadays can do in the UK, or a Ghanaian can do now in the UK. So, do you think colonization through language has played a role in terms of attracting talented individuals from Africa to Western countries that share the same language?
Yeah, definitely. I would agree with that argument. I say that yes, colonization has really played a very big role in terms of languages. Because I mean, look, when you look at most of the brain drain that is happening across the continent, if you follow the pattern, you will of course see it. When you find those countries which were colonized by Britain, you will find most of the people running to UK. when you go to these Anglophone West African countries, you'll find most of these people going to France. So they are following the pattern because I mean it is very easy for someone to integrate when they already know the language, when they can speak the language. You know, that's the pattern that people are following up. So I mean that's why you are saying it is very difficult for, yeah, as you are saying, for someone from China or from Japan. I mean they can speak these languages, but of course when you look at the time that they will need to learn these new languages, it's also another factor that forces them at certain point, because I've had a lot of many Chinese friends and Japanese friends, they can't really fit in well. And so you have to, at the end of the day, you have to look at the time that you have to waste learning these languages. So at the end of the day, they end up going back to their home countries and contribute to that, but which is not the case in African countries. And I want also to bring in another aspect, like it is really a colonial aspect, and you know it is something that is still costing us, because now when you look at most of the international institutions, I want to talk about particularly the United Nations, and I'm speaking not because I'm affiliated or working for the institution, but I'm speaking from my own personal position. So when you look at the language aspect, language is another limiting aspect that is making, you know, some societies to lag behind, because some of these institutions have adopted these languages as official operational languages, you know. For instance, to work within the United Nations, you will require English, you will require French, and maybe some other additional languages. But I mean, look, we are looking at African societies which have their different languages, you know, and on top of that, to make it in life, maybe to work within these institutions, they will have to spend more other time and years to learn these languages. So I'm looking at a person who comes, for instance, from Ghana or Uganda, where the official language is English plus our own mother tongue, you know. And now on top of that, to enter into these spaces to make sure that maybe we make it in life, or you know, contribute our impact globally, we shall need to learn French. Imagine how much time we shall need to learn French. You know, all of these are limiting factors. At the end of the day, you can't really effectively compete with a French national who already on top of that, for instance, considering the fact that maybe person has grown up from a very, you know, preserved and, you know, enriched society where they have all of these privileges to go to school and learn all of these other languages, which is a very different context in Africa. So they can easily access these opportunities because of the privileges that they have before. And these institutions have made it easy by adopting these languages as official, not necessarily to, you know, encourage communication between the diversity of the countries, but in a certain way, some of us would argue to limit off other people from entering into these institutions. So the aspect of language is really very important here, and it is really, you know, influencing this trend. It is very easy for English speakers from Africa to enter into USA, Canada, UK. You know, it's very easy for French speakers from, you know, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso to go to these other French countries. And at the end of the day, who is benefiting? There are still these former colonial masters who are benefiting, because at the end of the day, you are contributing to their national development. And I think this is now, this is why I would fall for some of the radical rising leaders within Africa who are realizing this pattern. We need to do things, you know, differently now to ensure that we are not following these patterns. We need to at least, you know, do business not as usual. Otherwise, things are not going in the right direction.
Okay, thank you, Risa. Abdul Bari, do you have any ideas to add to this?
Yeah, I think Gariza has done justice to the topic. Yeah.
But you can have something. What do you think?
Yeah, I think brain drain is a burning issue right now, and unfortunately, uh, governments across Africa are not giving it the right amount of attention it deserves, the right amount of time and policy to solve this problem. And I think even though I talked about Ghana at the beginning, I think Ethiopia equally has the same problem within its health sector. We even recently had protests by doctors due to their working condition. And year on year, we see this unfortunate trend where more and more graduates are looking for opportunities abroad. And I don't think enough is being done, and I not only see the immediate effects that it has. For example, when you see the nurses or doctors going to the UK from Ghana, you're not only losing potential doctors or nurses that could have served in Ghana, but you also have a demographical problem because when you have educated parents, their children are more likely to have access to education. So it's going to be a generational loss. So I don't think it's as simple as what the New York University study said, that remittance makes better sense than keeping educated Africans in Africa. And I think the loss is generational. And I think it's going to affect the coming generation's ability to dream big, to build, and all those things have a multiplier effect. And yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to add. If none of you have anything to add, I think this will be the end of our episode today. I had a great time with both of you. Erisa, please.
Yeah, just yeah, one more thing that we didn't tackle, that I would like maybe all of us to just give our thoughts just in 1 or 2 minutes here. I wanted to raise this, but I think it slipped away from my mind. When you look at African governments and states, some of them have become transactional governments and transactional states. I'm going to give this example, or just that we have focused much on how Africa is losing this educated population, graduates and postgraduates and others. But there is a trend. I don't know how is it faring in other African countries, of even the unskilled labor that we are losing from Africa, especially going to the Middle East, in Dubai, in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, to work in the, actually not, I think I would even refer to the informal sector. Our brothers and sisters are going there to work in homes, as nuns, to give labor within those homes. I mean, this is a very rampant trend, especially in Uganda. We have even established agencies which are doing this. Almost, I think some other scholars have tried to refer it as to human trafficking, modern day slavery, which has been formalized, even marketalized, that we have agencies which are registered, they are paying taxes to the government, and the government is aware that our sisters and brothers are taken as home workers to the Middle East. And unfortunately, the conditions which they are facing there, they are very worrying. We have seen this on the news. Others even die from there because of the mistreatment that they receive from their host families there. But of course, they are doing all of this because of the conditions that we have talked about. But unfortunately, also, it goes back to the point that I mentioned for me, in my view, that some of them, they are not informed, because we have had witnesses from those who have come back from there. Actually, what I think majority of our people there in Africa, especially the uneducated ones, think that life outside Africa is actually something, very light and very nice and good compared to what they are going through here in Africa, which unfortunately turns out to be otherwise. So there is this trend. I want you to give your own perspective. The state has formalized it. They are offering contracts and licenses to agencies to transport not skilled but unskilled labor to go, especially in the Middle East. I don't know if it is something that is within the context of your own experiences in your own countries and because in Uganda it is a very huge issue. Actually, not even Uganda, but East Africa, because it is happening in Kenya, it is happening in Tanzania. But we have had governments which are, for instance, in Tanzania, the government is trying to regulate it because it is not really a good thing. It is like modern day slavery, because these people go there, they work in homes, they are mistreated, they are just there, at least in European and US and Canada. Of course, where we see that most people who go there, they are these graduates and educated people who are likely not even to end up in the, lesser, sectors. But when you look in the Middle East, it is something different, because I think some of our brothers and sisters, they even end up being recruited into the armies of some of these states which are still struggling, in Myanmar, in Ukraine, in those small countries which are still facing conflicts. We have had witnesses who have testified upon that. So this is something that is also affecting Africa, right, left, and center. I think it adds on the challenge that we have been talking about of brain drain. I don't know what is the aspect in Ethiopia, what is it in Ghana, or from your other experiences. What have you heard about it?
I think
Over
it's
to
quite
you, Brooke.
yeah, thank you. It's quite severe in Ethiopia, and I think the government even has institutionalized uh, the departure of domestic workers. There was a huge uproar, especially after some accidents, as you've mentioned, have happened. But as I was watching Parliament last week here in Ethiopia, I mean, government officials were making reports that they created job opportunities in the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, and they were reporting as if they were accomplishments. And I think they're looking at it from a point of view of remittance. And I also think uh, I feel like they have given up in their ability to create jobs locally. And it seems as if they're embracing opportunities abroad and they're seeing it as a way to let off steam, a way to create opportunities which otherwise they wouldn't be able to in their own country. And it's quite unfortunate. And I think we should see it as like a state failure because, quote unquote, one, the kind of jobs our brothers and sisters are subjected to in those countries isn't something that's going to elevate them the long term. It's the exploitation of their labor in the very simplest of ways. And um, one thing that we have to look at is what type of jobs are those people taking? Are they improving their skills? Are they going to be paid better sums across 10 years, 15 years? Those things aren't happening. And I think those countries are exploiting the labor forces for their immediate needs without any plan whatsoever for their futures. And I think Africa will pay this price in its demography in the future, where you will have an aging population, where most of those domestic workers will probably and eventually move back. Because what we see time and time again in the Middle East is that those domestic workers they work for a few years, 2 to 5 years, and they come back. And when they come back, what are they doing? So we will have a big demographic problem ourselves as this population continues to grow and age, because it won't be able to have uh, clear-cut careers where they will be able to make stable wages across their lifetime. To you, Abdul Bari, if you have any ideas to add.
I, I think you just finished the thing. It's state failure. In Ghana, we have some, but I don't actually know much about it in Ghana. But I've heard testimonies from people and how they were mistreated when they were there. So they're just so damning that sometimes I don't want to listen to it. I think was it last month I met someone from Lebanon who is studying
Mm.
who is studying in the American University in Lebanon. He was giving me how Africans are viewed in Lebanon. When they see you as a free African, they become surprised. How can you be free? Because that's how they see us. They see us as people who work in homes. And what happened over there is that the moment you step in there, they seize your passport because their system is such that you can't go in there as a person to work. Somebody will have to stand in as your employer to bring you. So the moment you come in, the person is going to take your passport, and now you become a slave to him. And it's like you see them, those people are just, it's just like somebody you are using as, I don't even know how to describe it. So, just like you said, we're going to face those problems. Like it's a state failure. These kind of people, when they grow old, they wouldn't be working there anymore because you don't want to have a household who is 60 years old. They will be brought back to our countries. And it means that they don't have pensions to live on. So what kind of life are they going to live? I believe that even if they are going to be domestic workers, they should be domestic workers in our own countries, because if we're a domestic worker to a rich Ghanaian, it means that the rich Ghanaian will actually have more time or enough time to supply his labor to the country. So you can look at it from several ways, and more especially those people that goes to work as domestic workers, even if they are in their countries, maybe they will get married, give birth to an intelligent child who may one day become a savior of our countries or provide labor for our country. So they are just different downsides to it. It's really worrying, and just like you said, it's a state failure. We have to work hard to, as much as we're talking about brain drain, this one is actually brain drain. Somebody may argue that it's not the intellectuals they are telling away, so it's not the brain. But you just like you said, these people they come back in 60 years, in 40 years time, to be a burden on the society, because when they come back, it didn't work for the country, but it's coming back to be on the health system of our country. It's coming back with no kids, and at the old age, you become more of a burden than you are of an asset to the society. So it's a big problem. We have to work on it, just like we are so much stressing on brain drain. This is also one part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, thank you so much. Yeah, just to wrap it up with from my side, yeah, you both raised very important points there, and I mean, you cannot say directly that it is brain drain, but of course I may argue it that it is brain drain still, as you have all both well said that we don't have in Africa, we don't have social security, especially for our aged population, and these people in the long run they are going to face that problem. They don't have any social security savings, and our safety nets are not there to cater for them, so it will be a strain to the economy. But of course, for me, it goes back to we should ask ourselves, why did we reach this point? Because all of these people, they are already 18, but they are not educated enough to get maybe from employment within the economies. They are not skilled. So where do we go wrong? Maybe is it that education system that we need, which I was talking about the other time, that we need to redefine and restructure to ensure that if someone is not either interested to continue with the formal education, can be absorbed within maybe the vocational, or can they pursue something that is related to their passion, other than being there without any skill, and then just end up in this pool of going outside to offer domestic labor and other kind of stuffs which are not really building on their personality and career. So well, you all said it very well, I think. Yeah, very nice important points raised there, something that we need to work on. Yeah, Brooke, over to you, but I think you're maybe out of the room because I see you are frozen. Abdul.
I think he's back.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, sorry, I was disconnected for a moment.
Okay. Yeah, should we wrap it up, Brooke? I think there
Yeah,
is
yeah,
nothing else
yeah.
from our side, unless yeah.
Okay, yeah. I think the video is gonna be quite interesting because I think I have gone out a few moments, but I think we have like a large segment in the middle, about an hour and 25 minutes. So I think you should be okay. Okay, good night, guys.
Good night.
All right, yeah, thank you. Good night too.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Bye.